evening and good to have you with us in the 9 p.m. edition of the Urban Debate. Viewers, one thing that's always on our mind and we're always looking for more information about is COVID vaccine. When is this world going to get a COVID vaccine? How far away are we from a vaccine? Essentially, that's the only solution to our current problem, to be able to fight it with a drug. Now, the experts have always told us that we are going to take a lot of time. It takes at least a year, if not for the entire process. We are currently just in the initial stages across the country. There are many projects and trials that are going on. But something very interesting has happened here in India. As you know, a few days ago we reported that ICMR has actually given approval to the company Bioethics, and they are actually going to be conducting trials in 12 different locations, collaborating with 12 different centers. And this is just the beginning, of course. But there is hope that India may actually be one of those to first find and develop a vaccine. Yet, there's a circular now that has been issued that has triggered a bit of a controversy. This ICMR circular actually says, fast-track all approvals related to initiation of clinical trial. Ensure that subject enrollment is initiated no later than 7th of July. Aim to launch the vaccine for public latest by 15th of August. Non-compliance to these deadlines and to these instructions will be viewed very seriously. Advised to treat project on highest priority and meet the given timelines without any lapse. This is the first indigenous vaccine being developed by India, and top priority project is being monitored by the highest level of government. Now, I understand and I appreciate that the government is pushing for it and closely tracking it. But August 15th, that's 1.5 months away from right now. Is that even a realistic timeline? What is it that the ICMR exactly meant that we should have by August 15th? What is the possibility at a time where our clinical trials, human trials, haven't even begun yet? We are going to be trying out this concoction, this vaccine that has gotten the approval for trials with over 1,100 people. But there are different phases, viewers. It takes time to give the medicine, to see the response in the first few days, then 1 week, a year later. Before that, without doing that, without the proper due diligence, what is it that we are expecting to be delivered on August 15th? That's the question I am seeking an answer to. Let's say good evening to the panelists who are joining us this evening. Dr. Anant Bhan, researcher of global health, bioethics and health policy. Dr. Shashank Joshi, Dean, Indian College of Physicians, Leeravati Hospital. Dr. Rakesh Mishra, Director for Center for Cellular and Molecular Biology, CCMB. Abantika Ghosh, Senior Associate Editor with The Print. And Dr. Ramanand Lakshminarayan, Affiliate Professor for Global Health at the University of Washington. And he's the Director and Senior Fellow at the Center for Disease Dynamics, Economics and Policies. Great to have all of you with us on this panel. Let me go across to Dr. Rakesh Mishra first and ask him his view. Dr. Mishra, what did you make of this set of instructions that has been issued by the ICMR? Are these deadlines really practical?
I mean, these are, I also had a look at the letter. I got access to that today. This is their internal letter, which I assume ICMR is trying to push for as fast as it can. I'm not sure whether we should interpret it as an announcement that they're going to give a vaccine on 15th. Is their way of internally managing their speed of things? As you mentioned, if the trial has not begun yet, there's no question that you can have a vaccine in next several months because it takes that kind of time. So I'm not sure whether ICMR is promising to deliver a vaccine on 15th. If they are doing that, is simply not possible, given that the vaccine has not even gone to stage 1 trial.
Okay, let me ask you this question. From your own, in your view, with your expertise, Dr. Mishra, how long does it take We know that the approvals have been given and it's going to be split into multiple phases. How long should it ideally take if everything even, goes the right way?
Even if it is, let's say, is going to be the vaccine which will be successful, you should count not less than 6 months from starting, because it's very simple arithmetic. First stage will take at least a month to figure out whether it's something toxic or not, is safe or not. Then you get a stage two, again then and a half, 1.5 month or something, and in between some time for documentation, and then you do stage three, large scale, maybe thousands of people, and then you're talking about, if everything goes very fine, you think that you will hit upon the correct dose in the beginning itself. You will not have to optimize what is the dose, how many boosters you have to get. All those things is still, we should be taking 6 months as a very, very optimistic time, normal condition. I don't know if there are some extraordinary ways of start making a shortcut in the process, but certainly the safety will become a major factor, because it's something very unknown. You cannot be giving a vaccine unless it has been proven to be safe, and to have that the vaccine is safe, you must have tried it over few months in large number of people, so that you can figure out if there is some defect and some toxic effect, or some thing which is not very obvious, which can take time to come up. So all these things are required. It is not for nothing that these trials, stage trials, are designed for the safety what we are going to give to the people.
Okay, fair enough. Let me also bring in Abantika Ghosh on this story. Abantika, initially when this circular emerged and started doing the rounds, the letter itself, many were surprised. Many thought maybe there was a typo. Maybe they meant 15th August 2021. But we are yet to hear on any clarification, official clarification from the ICMR on what is it that they expect. What is your own reading of this letter?
In the morning, in fact, most of us, we got the letter, but we kept waiting for ICMR confirmation that this is real, because it sounded, the timeline sounded so fantastic that at first glance, all of us thought this was a fake letter. But then ICMR, after some time, did confirm that such a letter has gone out. But what has happened is that throughout the day, we were trying to reach out to ICMR, to Dr. Bhargav, to find out how exactly is it going to happen, because the trial has been registered with the Clinical Trial Registry of India, and that gives the trial duration is 15 months. So there's no clarity how that 15 months is going to get crunched into these, less than 6 weeks period. Also, one thing is that, for a vaccine, you have to wait for the infection to happen to see whether, so that takes a lot of time. I mean, unless you go into a human challenge, it's very difficult. This is a very difficult timeline.
Yes, and I wanted to highlight the part that Abantika is also talking about, the fact that we've and even we have waited all day for a detailed explanation or a clarification. I don't know if it will even come now. We are still, hoping that there is some official word that comes in from the ICMR on this, because the timeline does seem odd. But let me ask the experts. Dr. Anant Bhan has written quite a bit about it since morning, so I'm sure he was as flummoxed as many others, Dr. Bhan. And why is that? If you can just help our viewers understand why the timeline of getting anything by mid-August just seems really bizarre right now.
Thank you, Tanvi. So, as was described, I think, earlier as well, typically clinical research, and especially vaccine clinical research, takes a fair bit of time. The description which we have gotten so far is that they are starting off their phase 1 and phase 2 studies in the second week of July with participant recruitment happening. These are important aspects of clinical trials, because you're looking at safety and immunogenicity data being generated, and that takes a fair, that takes time for us to have the confidence that there is enough promise in any vaccine candidate to go in for efficacy studies, which is when you go to larger studies to see if this vaccine actually provides protection against a disease, in this case COVID-19. So to do that well, you would need to work in multiple sites, which is what they're planning to do. But then you would also need to provide enough time to be able to know whether it is a safe vaccine and if it is causing an immune response, because the immune response does take some time. Once you've injected the vaccine candidate, then by the time the body immune response happens, you need to follow that. You need to have lab tests done. You need to find out what kind of titers of antibodies are you seeing. Are those protective in nature or not? And that can take up to a few weeks. So once you have that data again, then you will analyze and say, is this promising enough for us to go in for phase 3 studies, which are typically efficacy studies, where you would then go give this vaccine candidate to a large population of individuals, typically in thousands, who would then need to, first of all, agree to participate in a clinical trial, participate in that clinical trial, some of who would be also then at risk of being exposed to infection, and then try to find out at the end of the day that is this vaccine candidate actually providing protection against the disease. Now, to get all of that done in 45 days is highly improbable and almost impossible in my opinion. So that is why, for many of us, this letter is very surprising, that there is an assumption being made that on the 15th of August, we would have done all of the phases of clinical trials for this vaccine, and that we would be ready to launch a new vaccine for public health use. It's pretty much fiction from what we know about the science. So unless we are taking shortcuts in the science, in the proper protocols that we need to do, this would not be something that seems possible to do. And hence, there needs to be clarity on what exactly is being planned, and is there a are they talking about something else than what is mentioned in the letter? Because the only information we have in the public domain is for phase 1 and phase 2 studies. We don't know anything about efficacy studies as well now.
Okay, fair enough. So then here is the next point. And before we talk about what could be perhaps possible by August, or what could be the possible timeline, when should we prepare ourselves that maybe we'll have a vaccine year end next year. But before that, Dr. Shashank Joshi, my question to you is, what could be the pitfalls of a rushed process? If we do rush it, and there's a fine line between saying, well, this is our priority, all our resources onto that, let's not delay it at all, versus rushing it without the proper due diligence. What are the pitfalls of that when it comes to a vaccine?
So very double-edged sword, because you're giving it to human beings who are not infected. They are normal population like you and me. And therefore, we need to be very cautious and careful when we do safety and efficacy trials of a vaccine. Normal vaccines take at least 10 to 15 years. The chickenpox vaccine took 22 years to develop. I am very happy that in Corona times, we are fast-tracking the vaccine to 9 months to 18 months. To fast-track to 6 weeks, I think Dr. Bhargav probably meant is to do it as early as possible. I don't think that 6 weeks is a realistic deadline. I think what he is trying to do is try to be careful. Now remember that when we are looking at natural history of Corona, as Dr. Bhan said, we need to develop the antibody. Normally, if you get COVID disease, you get antibody by 3rd or 4th week for its highest titer. So it takes 1 month for antibody development. How do you expect an inactivated virus which is injected to develop vaccine and antibodies in less than a month? So I think this 1 month is not doable. Maybe if you take all the due diligence of safety and efficacy, earliest it may take is 6 months or 9 months. This is like super fast track, super fast track, because safety and efficacy comes first. We are all bound by the Hippocrates oath, primum non nocere, which is first of all do no harm. And therefore, in vaccine, safety and efficacy is important. And I'm sure ICMR has done all their due diligence, that thought process. Professor Bhargav is a very learned doctor, and I'm sure he and his team, which have collaborated with the National Institute of Virology and Bharat Biotech, must have done their research, and probably. But I think this is an internal letter which they have put out. We need to really look at the deadlines which they have put out. These deadlines look very unrealistic to me from a public health standpoint or a clinical standpoint. And we need to be very cautious and careful, because vaccines can have their own side effects. Yeah.
Yes. Do you think a deadline of 15th August 2021 is a lot more realistic?
No, I think maybe a little earlier than that. I tweeted on this also, and I said that this is like Usain Bolt running 100 meters in 5 seconds, and that's a very tall deadline. But I think probably somewhere in middle part, December, January looks more realistic, to be very honest.
Okay, December, January may be more realistic to have by then hopefully we may have a vaccine. Dr. Ramanan Lakshminarayan, also good evening to you, or rather good morning to you from where you join us right now. What is your own sense in terms of the various projects that are currently on, various research projects and trials in different phases across the world? How far is the world from actually finding the right vaccine for COVID? Okay. I don't think we are able to hear him. I'm going to go back to him in just a bit. But let me take that question back to then Dr. Bhan. Dr. Bhan, from all the trials that we have, including the one in India, how long do you think, do you agree, maybe December or January, somebody would have found something?
Well, it's likely that anything before that would be very, very difficult. December, January is probably the earliest which might be possible. Even that is challenging, but I think there is a lot of effort being done by various agencies, companies, research groups, and WHO is also supporting that in trying to ensure that we have something which is efficacious as early as possible. But none of the other groups have talked about such a collapsed timeline. So I think at least giving it another 5, 6, 8 months is probably the likely scenario. And once we have a vaccine which works, then we would also need to know, does it work across the age spectrum? Is it something which works for kids? Is it something which works for those who are in the middle age spectrum? Does it work for elderly? Does it work for any kind of population? How do you give it? What kind of dosage do you need? How long does it give protection for? Do you need to give a repeat dose or not? These are all, and many other things which we would require to know about the vaccine are things which would need to be clarified, because only then we will be know whether, how and in which way should we introduce this into public health use. Remember, our program right now, our National Public Health Program, and the vaccinations we use, there's hardly anything which is used across the age spectrum. Typically there are vaccines which are for the pediatric age group. You might have vaccines for the adolescent age group. You might have the occasional vaccine which is used in the private market, which is for adults or for the geriatric age group. But for effective public health coverage, we would need a COVID-19 vaccine which can be used across the age groups. And for that, we need data also across all of those age groups, and then find out a way for us to make it available for anyone across the age spectrum and ensure that it is safe and efficacious for all of those individuals. So, there are a lot of complexities in this research, and hence there is a need for caution and doing it in the right way as well.
Okay, very quickly before I go across to Dr. Ramanan and we get the audio through with him, Abantika, I just wanted to come back to you. Outside of ICMR, what has been, or has there been any official response or unofficially, what have your sources told you from the other side, from the research side, from the companies, from the centers who are going to be involved in these trials? How have they viewed this letter and this set of instructions that has come in?
So one thing that ICMR people are telling us is that so they're saying that we are setting a deadline. We will try, and unless we set a goal, we can't reach it. So we are setting this deadline, and we will try and reach it. That's the idea. But when we're trying to talk to some of the principal investigators, there seems to be a lot of confusion. In fact, even about the protocol. It's too soon. Also, the company is not willing to talk about this particular thing of this 15th August deadline. They have not spoken to us on this. They said we would not like to comment. But even with whatever has been submitted to the clinical trial registry, there's confusion about what are they using, what is the control group going to use. because the protocol says the JE vaccine. Somebody else said something else. So there's clearly a lot of confusion. Also, one interesting thing when I was going through the clinical trial registry data is that the phase 2 trial, it is supposed to examine immunogenicity of the vaccine till day 194. That itself is more than 6 months. So there's no clarity actually on how this is going to go, and it doesn't seem that the PIs have had any other sort of clarity from ICMR apart from that letter, which came out this morning. So right now there's huge confusion on this. Many people are saying many different things.
Well, okay, so one way of looking at it is to say ISMR simply saying that no, we are just putting a deadline so that there is some amount of pressure and a time period for people to work with. But if it's going to be so different from what is actually practically needed, there is always fear that people may just rush through it without giving it the proper due diligence. I think that's the larger concern that everybody seems to have at this point of time. Dr. Ramanan, good evening. Hopefully we'll be able to hear you this time. My question to you was, how far is the world in the various projects that we have right now from actually finding a vaccine?
So I hope you can hear me now. There are probably 120 vaccine projects out there, and the earliest ones of them are likely to result potentially in a usable vaccine, although not manufactured earliest, I would say, by about February or March of next year. And that's with a lot of things going right. I would still bet on next summer being far more likely. Now, this particular Bharat Biotech vaccine is probably not such an improbable vaccine. It's an inactivated virus, therefore, greater chance of safety and so forth. But I would agree with all the other panelists that this is a highly unlikely time frame for any vaccine, and certainly for the Bharat Biotech vaccine as well, to really follow. Just to keep in mind, the rotavirus vaccine, which was developed indigenously in India with, in partnership with, took over 30 years, and that was developed by a number of entities, finally produced by Bharat Biotech. So 30 years is what that vaccine took. And so 45 days, there must be some mistake. It just cannot be that's the time frame that's being proposed.
Okay, let me just then ask you, this question in another way. The fact of the matter is that obviously everybody is feeling the pressure right now to quickly find a solution. We're trying different drugs to see how they work in treating COVID patients. We're also trying various methods of finding a vaccine. Like you said, about 120 different projects across the world, about 24 of them perhaps at a relatively advanced stage. But is there also a concern that this race for finding a vaccine may actually become detrimental to getting the right vaccine?
So I think different vaccines are going to fit different profiles. So for instance, the mRNA vaccine, the Moderna vaccine that everyone in the US is very excited about, that may not be the right vaccine for India because that requires a cold chain that operates at minus 80 degrees. It's a very expensive vaccine. So it makes sense for India to have its own vaccine where India gets its priority for the vaccine. I don't think there's anything wrong with that at all. And it is not necessary that another vaccine that was developed for another country context and their health system will necessarily be the best fit for India. It is just that there is a deliberative process because I think, again, like one of your other panelists said, the thing with this COVID vaccine is you're going to have to give it to every single person in India to prevent a very, very small proportion of them from developing severe disease. So once you're exposing every single person, and remember, there is no vaccine in the world today practically that you give to all age groups the same vaccine. There are variants even for some of these. Maybe the seasonal influenza vaccine comes closest to some extent to this. So we don't generally do it, and seasonal influenza vaccine is not really good in India very much either. So the bar for safety for this vaccine is much higher than it is for other vaccines. And when the bar is higher, it means that the amount of work and time that it takes to do clinical trial is also much greater. If anything, this will take much longer and not shorter amount of time, and the effort will have to be more for this vaccine, given that in the public health space, it will have to be proven to be extremely safe because they're giving it to a lot of people who are going to be fine anyway without the vaccine.
In fact, I wanted to ask this question as well, and Dr. Mishra, maybe you can come in on this. For a vaccine like this, ideally, what is the number of people it should be tried on? In different phases, we keep increasing the number of participants in this trial, but what should be the ideal number that we test it on?
There's nothing like ideal number. More is better because then you rely more the vaccine. There are vaccines which are monitored for years and years, and you accumulate data and you keep refining things. But considering the emergency, considering the pandemic, at least few thousand people should be tested, and there should be proper data collection to figure out whether there is a vaccine we have or not. We are talking about making a vaccine, or we have a vaccine and we are just going to announce about it. I'm not sure we should interpret too much of this internal letter of ICMR. As you have seen, all the experts have clearly said that it's just simply not possible. So even if you had the vaccine and you had to just simply try on your population, it is not going to be that fast. So, I mean, we shouldn't be even giving this false hope to people of a vaccine or a drug for this pandemic. There's something else that we need to do to take care of this pandemic. Vaccines may come. Remember that no vaccine is there for good vaccine for a coronavirus. I'm not saying that that means we will not have this vaccine, but this is a tough, long journey. It's not going to be weeks and months that we are going to have vaccine which will be useful for all of us in the country. As you already heard, there are vaccines which will not be fit for our population for variety of reasons, and there are even biological reasons for which a vaccine will not fit all. So it's very good that so many efforts are going on, and hopefully in a couple of years we will have something to deal with. But that is still a hope. We cannot just simply say that we are going to have vaccine. It's a matter of time, and simply not in 5 weeks or 6 weeks.
Okay, so let me then ask this question, Dr. Anant Bhan, maybe you want to come in on this, that perhaps by mid-August, the government and the ICMR hopes to at least say that we're going to start the first set of human trials, that we've identified 1,000-odd people and these trials are already on, or that that part is already done. What could it be that we do get to know on 15th of August?
Yeah, so I mean, the only data I guess we should have by then, if they actually manage to get the participant recruitment started and all the sites are ready to initiate vaccine research, is maybe data on safety. And to some, immunogenicity I'm doubtful about, but maybe some early data. But then again, you need to ensure that this is data which is verified independently, because you wouldn't want the investigators to, because there is a bias there, to be the ones announcing the data without someone independently verifying it in the first place. Beyond that, I don't think it's possible to expect any kind of efficacy data. So the only data you might get is safety and immunogenicity to some extent, probably only safety. And if that is the case, then you can only just say that based on the kind of research that we've done so far, it seems to be safe to administer in human volunteers, but we have no clue whether it actually works or if it even causes any kind of an immune response. Efficacy studies for vaccines in this domain will require a large sample size, as you were asking, also because remember, ethically, you will have to require that all individuals who are participating in the efficacy part of the study have to be told that you should be wearing masks, you should be taking normal public health measures like physical distancing, like washing your hands, and then you would expect some of them to not follow that, just in the same way HIV vaccine research happens, where all participants are told to use condoms if they are if they are going in for any risky sexual behavior, and then some of them will not, and hence that is where you will start to see endpoints. So in this case also, you would need to have a large enough sample size so that you would know that some of them will potentially be infected to infection, and across the two arms, your intervention arm which gets this candidate vaccine and your control arm which either gets a placebo vaccine, a vaccine which doesn't have any active ingredient, or an active control vaccine like the Japanese encephalitis vaccine which was described, that you find a discernible difference between the two arms to say, yes, there is a protective effect for the vaccine. And for those, the numbers literally will be in the thousands, because to get the sample size to be able to effectively say with confidence that there is a level of protection that the vaccine is giving, you really need a large sample size. That also means that you need to consent in that number of individuals to agree to participate in a clinical trial. You need those sites to be ready to be able to run these trials. People are apprehensive about going to hospitals right now, to clinical trial centers, and this is a vaccine which would be given to healthy individuals in the hope that it would prevent them from getting infected. So it's also going to be a challenge to consent people into agreeing to participate by going to health centers or hospitals which are clinical trial sites. It's not going to be easy. So I think all of that needs to be kept in mind, and hence assuming that all of that can be done in a short period is unlikely. So I think let's hope that we are starting off on a journey of doing good quality research. We need Indian innovation in this domain. We need more Indian R&D, and ICMR as a premier biomedical research agency has an important role to play in it. So they should not just be setting the standards, but they should be following their own guidelines. High quality research needs to happen, and hopefully they will provide leadership in that domain.
Okay, I completely agree with you. And yes, hopefully that's what will happen. But here is my second question then, a follow-up to that. Dr. Shashank Joshi, even once we are able to say, not have the ideal number, but a fair amount of people, have been, given this vaccine, the tests have been done, it's been studied, it's been approved, and the vaccine is ready. How long after that for it to reach the people, the manufacturing, distribution, the way it will be done? Because I do know that the government actually recently held a high-level meeting. The Prime Minister himself chaired that meeting, and I think the vision that was put out was that we need to start preparing now itself, where in the first round we will probably give the vaccine first to the corona warriors, to the doctors and nurses who are at the front line of it, to the vulnerable groups. But we have to ensure that everybody gets access to it at some point. How long will that entire process take for a country like India?
So I think, Tanvi, that's the bright side of India, because we are the global outsource capital for generic biotech medicines. In fact, even the Oxford vaccine, which is undergoing trials in South Africa and UK, the Cambridge one, the Oxford one, they are also going to outsource it from India, from Serum. So I think from that standpoint of capacity building for commercialization of vaccines, I think Bharat Biotech, Zydus, and many other players in India can easily produce these vaccines. They have the capabilities of doing it. So that process probably would be fast-tracked. What needs to be having a due diligence is how can we fast-track the clinical trial process. That cannot be shortcutted, but if they can do that, nothing like it. It's a pandemic situation. We wish them best of luck, but I personally feel what you're asking is very doable, because I think India is one country in the world which can mass produce drugs, which can mass produce biotechs and vaccines, and whether it's Hyderabad, Ahmedabad, or any part of India, they have capabilities to do it for mass level, not only for India, but for the rest of the world. I think that is something our pharma industry is very good at, our biotech is very good at, and they have global approvals right from US FDA to EMA. So I think that is not a challenge. I think the real challenge is the early part of phase 1, and I think the phase 2 will be a combined one. I think it's going to be combined phase 2, phase 3. That's what most of the UK and US trials are doing. And also we must congratulate ICMR. ICMR is partnering with a private enterprise, just like NIH is partnering with Moderna in the US. India has also started a journey in the right direction. Only these timelines might be a little blurred, but I think at least we are in the right research direction, and we hope good quality research comes out. And India probably is right up there in the race of developing a vaccine. And let's be optimistic that we get a vaccine as early as possible with meeting the highest ethical, efficacy, and safety standards, and we are able to supply it to the rest of the world.
Okay, well, on that optimistic note, I think I'm going to thank everybody for joining us on this conversation. I believed that it was extremely essential to put that letter that has caused so much of controversy in perspective, since everybody wants to know when are we going to get a vaccine, and there was some amount of interpretation of that letter to say, wait, are you saying that on 15th of August it is possible that the government will say we found the vaccine and soon all our lives can, we can all go back to living it normally the way we were? As you've heard now, viewers, from all of our experts, it's highly unlikely that that's what will happen, because these processes, the entire trial phases, 1, 2, 3, trying it on smaller number of people, then recording that, studying that, then on a larger set of people, all of that is yet to happen. And this is a vaccine. It's not just about treatment. You have to understand the impact it may have on the person you're trying the vaccine on the medicine on. So it's not just to say that if you administer it today and tomorrow the person seems all okay, you know that this works. It doesn't work like that. You have to research and record the response that a body gives to any kind of chemical or medicine for months together before you can actually say, okay, this is safe, this works, we can use it. Safety and long-term impact is also extremely important when it comes to pharmaceutical drugs, which is why it is highly unlikely that anybody will be able to give us a vaccine before the end of the year. And that too will be an unprecedented, groundbreaking speed really when it comes to developing any vaccine. We've not seen that ever happen in this world, but times are such that everybody is putting their best foot forward and putting all the resources and energies into finding this one vaccine. Suffice to say, the deadline is not for us to be told that a vaccine will be found. We're still waiting for the ICMR or the government to give us some kind of clarity about this letter. Did they get the date wrong or did they mean something else? But big thank you for all of our panelists for joining us right now and really giving us those insights and clearing all of our doubts. Viewers, I want to move ahead and talk about this one other big story. Today, the Prime Minister visited Ladakh, and there was an unprecedented decision, an unprecedented step that's been taken to send across a big message. Prime Minister Modi visiting Ladakh in the middle of the escalated tension between India and China, at a time when there are military conversations going on between the two sides to disengage, to de-escalate, at a time that the two sides have raised this issue diplomatically, and the whole world is watching what's going on between India and China along the line of actual control. Prime Minister Modi himself went and he met the soldiers there. He visited the injured in the hospital there. He met other soldiers. He went to a few posts. He addressed them. His intent was to boost their morale. But what is the larger message and how should we read this decision, this visit of his? That's what I want to just focus on. Before I go across to our expert, listen in to what the Prime Minister said. This is just an excerpt of the address he delivered in Ladakh today.
विस्तारवाद का युग समाप्त हो चुका है। ये युग विकासवाद का है। तेजी से बदलते हुए समय में विकासवाद ही प्रासंगिक है। विकासवाद के लिए ही अवसर है और विकासवाद ही भविष्य का आधार भी है। बीती शताब्दियों में विस्तारवाद ने ही मानवता का सबसे ज्यादा हित किया, मानवता को विनाश करने का प्रयास किया। विस्तारवाद की जीत जब किसी पर सवार हुई है, उसने हमेशा विश्व शांति के सामने खतरा पैदा किया है। और साथियों, ये न भूले, इतिहास गवाह है कि ऐसी ताकतें मिट गई हैं या मुड़ने के लिए मजबूर हो गई है। देश की रक्षा आपके हाथों में है, आपके मजबूत इरादों में है, तो एक अटूट विश्वास है। सिर्फ मुझे नहीं, पूरे देश को अटूट विश्वास है और देश निश्चिंत भी है। आप जब सरहद पर डटे हैं तो यही बात प्रत्येक देशवासी को देश के लिए दिन रात काम करने के लिए प्रेरित करती है। आत्मनिर्भर भारत का संकल्प आप लोगों के कारण, आपके त्याग, बलिदान, पुरुषार्थ के कारण और मजबूत होता है। और अभी जो आपने और आपके साथियों ने वीरता दिखाई है, उसने पूरी दुनिया में ये संदेश दिया है कि भारत की ताकत क्या है।
Let's say good evening to Maruf Razas, Strategic Affairs Expert and Consulting Editor to the Times Network. Maruf, how do you view this entire visit? What do you think was the purpose behind Prime Minister visiting Ladakh at such a time?
See, obviously, there is a very important message that goes out to India, the armed forces, and the world as such, with the Prime Minister having gone to what is clearly now a conflict zone. It's very much in line with how, say, American presidents do visit Iraq and Afghanistan on a surprise visit. Great morale booster for troops, and also for him to get a perspective on really what the lay of the ground is. This also will help clarify issues in his mind about, what are the frontiers of India that are being defended with life and limb by our soldiers, and the need to actually find a long-term settlement to it, because quite clearly the non-demarcation of the boundary has been an issue with China for the last 60, 70 years. But there are 3 or 4 quick points. One is, in his speech, which you just played out, that the world is now moving towards technological and other advancement. The era of expansion is gone. On the same message, I wonder if President Xi Jinping takes it well, because he is suddenly embarked on massive expansionism. In Taiwan, he's been wanting to get militarily more aggressive than some of his earlier predecessors. Americans have put 2 aircraft carrier groups. Maybe a third one is moving in from the Pacific. And an aircraft carrier group is very big. It has about 40 to 100 ships and submarines, aircrafts and other things. It's a moving major army, navy platform. The second thing is that Hitler moved and opened up in too many fronts in World War II, and you saw what came of him. So if Mr. Xi wants to open up against Taiwan and South China Sea and against India and whoever else, I don't know for the moment, he's asking for real trouble. China in numbers and economically is bigger than India, but not bigger and better prepared than us on this particular front line or all along the Indian border. And as I've always argued, their force levels are massively stretched. They have borders with 14 countries, and they haven't really resolved all the border issues with some of their major rivals like Vietnam. So I think there could be a problem area there. The second thing is that Mr. Modi has conveyed to President Xi Jinping that there is a need for strategic reevaluation of our relationship. It's not going to be honky-dory anymore. It's not going to be Sino-Indian relations when China continues to fleece us with all kind of economic benefits without making it easy for our companies to trade there. It's going to be really tit for tat. And the closing down of many companies and the technological companies and the extra restrictions put on FDI is a very clear message to China. Some people say China is laughing through it, but they're laughing in panic because they didn't expect India to come across so strongly. It is going to have a negative impact on their economy in the range of $10 to $12 billion with every year. And this could go up if India begins to dig its heels in. And Mr. Modi's Atmanirbhar Bharat actually takes off the way he imagines it to. Sadly, it hasn't really. And the other aspect is that there's a need to refocus our armed forces from Pakistan to a 50-50 balance between Pakistan and China, because they are both working in consonance. It's not going to be just Pakistan that will needle you. More and more China is going to come in, and they've propped up Pakistan for all these years precisely to put India in a tough spot. There is an interesting book called China-Pakistan Nexus by Andrew Small, and it talks in great detail how China smartly but steadily built up Pakistan as a major distraction for India, and it's become a distraction for South Bloc. But South Bloc needs to refocus its compass, and it's not going to be talks that will resolve issues with China anymore. You're going to talk from a position of strength, and that is what the Prime Minister has conveyed today. And his going there to a frontline area sends out many messages. The CDS was with him. So it's an inter-service operation. Many people think the Navy is not involved. They are. P-81 naval reconnaissance aircrafts are doing reconnaissance on the front line. And the Navy is on a high alert. And that is really a trump card. If China doesn't pull back, there is no reason why we should not start blocking Chinese naval routes south of India towards the Strait of Malacca. And so there are issues that are going to come into play. This is not going to end in a week's time. Yeah, sorry.
He actually, Maruf, also specifically mentioned the end of the era of expansionism. The people who attempted to do that earlier, that will not be, possible anymore. The forces who've tried to expand forcibly have ended or forced to turn back. Do you think that, this message is going to go through and go down well with our neighbor? Because this is obviously what they're doing, not just along the front with India, but also on in several other locations.
Yeah, by our neighbor, you mean China. Even Mr. Modi did not name China in his speech. He tends to avoid naming the culprit, whether China or Pakistan, in some of his major speeches. I've noticed that even with Pakistan. But by all assumptions, you're not going to go there in Ladakh and talk about Pakistan. So China really, I don't know if the message will certainly go home, but I don't know if they'll respond. And I'll tell you why. Because their expansion in Ladakh is not about a few square kilometers here and there. It is about a longer strategic goal. And I've always argued the longer strategic goal is not just territorial acquisition, but territorial acquisition that enhances their strategic and economic goals. You get more territory in Galwan area, move up northwards, and try and blockade India's military movement towards DBO, which is the world's highest military airfield. And it is really the fight about how close that China can bring its artillery to disrupt activity on this new 250-kilometer highway that India has just made from Shiok to DBO. But beyond DBO, they're looking to get a connect to Karakoram Pass. And from Karakoram Pass, they're going to look for territorial acquisition to get to Shakstam Valley, which is north of the state of Jammu and Kashmir, erstwhile state. And that is an area which gives them water resources for their microchip and silicon industry, which they need to go in for, because America has now suddenly put embargo on software-related technology to be sold to China. They're threatening Taiwan. You either make up our shortfall. China last year imported $310 billion worth of silicon and microchip stuff. And Taiwan is one of the largest producers of that. And they're saying, if you don't, we'll start hitting you militarily. And that's why America's moving to aircraft carrier group. So you see, what you're seeing is a bigger strategic picture unfolding. I don't want to sound like the prophet of doom, but Bruce Rydell, a person who's worked with 4 White House administrations, has written best-selling books on Pakistan, has now written a book on India-China War of 62 and how Nehru got the relationship with America wrong. And he argues in his book now that the India-China flashpoint on the boundary could be perhaps the start of World War III. Now, that is anybody's guess. It's too early to say that. But this is a major flashpoint which America is monitoring, and that's why Trump has also made some very strong statements against China. Quite clearly, China has chewed too much. Xi has lost the plot, and I think they're cornered. They're going to look for a half-decent exit. We have to give them that if we want tensions to escalate, but not without losing precious territory, which China has done. And it is a failure of Indian intelligence, whatever else anybody says, who is an apologist for this Sarkar. It is an intelligence failure. It is a bit like Kargil, but in Kargil, we went hammer and tongs because it became too much of a story for the Vajpayee government not to handle. Here, the response from the army has been pretty quick, pretty tough. Our soldiers have laid their life down, and I don't think that sacrifice should go in vain.
Yeah. No, I completely agree with you, and I think while the soldiers and the army is ready, it remains to be seen from what happens from here on, and how quickly we manage to take all of our territory back and throw the Chinese out. To the other point that you made, about a larger shift, tectonic shift, or a possibility of the conflict intensifying. Well, we've historically seen when it comes to authoritarian leaders, when they begin to see problem internally, they always look for war as a solution to win back their populism and their votes. So with the Chinese president now, things could go either ways, which is perhaps what we're seeing right now. Him attempting to do all this to maybe win back some of the faith of his own people. Thank you, Maruf Raza. Always a pleasure to have you on our conversations. This one specifically focusing on Prime Minister's visit to the Ladakh and what it means in the middle of this crisis, this standoff with India, China. Quick break, lots more news on the other side. Stay with me.